I think we can get started now. My name is Alice Farmer, and I am a refugee specialist with Human Rights Watch. And I have been working on the issue of immigration detention of children in various countries now for a few years. So thank you for coming to the launch of our report on immigration detention of children in Thailand. I will spend a few minutes going over our main findings from this report, and then we'll take questions. So I will just start with our principal findings, which is that Thailand has a system of arbitrary detention of children and migrant families. That detention can often be indefinite, and that arbitrary, indefinite detention is in violation of international law, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Thailand is party. In the course of our investigation, which lasted for about a year and a half, we found that the conditions in the IDCs, the immigration detention centers, and the police lockups fell far below international minimum standards for conditions of detention. And that particularly with relation to children, the conditions in detention that were problematic included splitting up families, housing children with unrelated adults, and leaving them at risk of violence, problematic nutrition, lack of access to exercise and recreation, insufficient access to education, and really just depriving children of many of the opportunities they need to thrive. This is particularly of concern given that many of the children in the IDCs can be held for months or even years. And those years amount to lost lives for the children concerned. In the past few years, as I've been studying this issue in a number of countries, I think it really worth emphasizing that alternatives to detention do exist and that it is not necessary to detain migrant children or their families. We would very much urge the Thai government to implement alternatives to detention, like shelter programs or release and recognizance for families, so that you don't have to lock up children. Thailand has made some small steps towards implementing these programs, and those steps are very welcome, but more can be done. I'm going to back up a little bit and tell a story of one of the families I worked closely with for this report, because I think it helps illustrate the problem more concretely. About 9 months ago now, I was in California, which is an odd place to do research on a Thailand human rights issue. But I met there with a Sri Lankan family, a Sri Lankan Tamil family, who had been resettled to California from Thailand. They were refugees, and they had come to Thailand from Sri Lanka and were in hiding in Bangkok. There are 4 girls in the family, and the youngest was 8 years old. The mother had gone out to hospital one morning, and the immigration department raided the hiding place where the family was. They arrested the 4 girls and the father and took them to the immigration detention center. Under Thai law, there is no recognition for refugees, and they can be arrested at any time. When they were taken to the IDC, the immigration center in Bangkok, here on Soi Son Plu, the 4 girls were separated from their father and taken to separate cells. The mother returned from hospital and realized from other people in the neighborhood that that her daughters and her husband had been arrested. And she spent 2 days desperately worried about her children. She knew what was going on inside the center because they had other community members who had been taken there. And she knew that the girls would have been separated from their father and put in a horrible cell. And I remember her saying, I'd hear them talking like they were calling to me, like they were knocking at the door. So she decided to voluntarily check herself into the immigration detention facility so that she could be with her children. But in order to do so, she had to go first to the court here in Thailand and pay a fine. The fine is technically for violating immigration law, but she effectively paid a fine for the privilege of being detained in the immigration detention center. She spent 2 years in the immigration detention center with her children. So the youngest of her daughters spent from age 8 to age 10 about a fifth of her life in immigration detention. They were in a cell that sometimes had more than 100 occupants, with filthy toilets, with sewage spewing onto the floor, an air quality that was difficult to breathe. The girls were not allowed access to recreation space and basically were able to go outside perhaps 2 hours a week. The youngest girl developed a rash all over her skin, and a persistent cough that lasted throughout the 2 years of detention. The girls described to me having no room to sleep, and that when the cell was particularly crowded, they would sit and lean up against each other in order to be able to sleep. There were a handful of Sri Lankan families in the facility at the time, and the mothers got together and tried to carve out space for the children to play. But they were not always successful in this because the room was so crowded. The girls didn't have adequate nutrition. They basically had the same soup and rice for 2 or 3 meals a day, occasionally with supplemental food provided by IOM or by some of the embassies in Bangkok. But that's some of the lucky parts. IDCs in the provinces tend not to have that assistance from the international community. So when I met this little girl, she was 10 and she was in California, and I asked her how she felt about having left the IDC, and I expected her to say something positive, that her life was better now, that now she was free. And she turned to me and she said she was really sad. I thought, well, I was surprised by that. I wasn't clear why. And I said, why did it make you sad to leave the IDC? And she said, I left all my friends behind. To me, the idea of a child getting used to being in detention, indefinite detention in those kinds of conditions, was heartbreaking for me. And I think it's a great emphasis of the impact on child development that immigration detention can have. When children are detained at a young age, they don't understand why it's happening to them. They have rarely done anything. They've not been the people who've chosen to make these immigration choices. And particularly for refugee children, they have often fled conditions that are traumatic. In the course of fleeing to another country, they have experienced more trauma during their journeys. And immigration detention just exacerbates those problems. And in fact, a number of reputable medical studies worldwide have found that immigration detention of children has a particularly negative impact on their mental health and leads routinely to post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems. Here in Thailand, I think we should be aware that this affects 2 different groups of children. There are the refugee children, like the Tamil family that I described here. And under Thai law, the basic idea is that the only way to get out of immigration detention is to go home. Refugees can't go home, so those children are effectively detained indefinitely until another country will agree to resettle them outside of the immigration system in Thailand. That's one group of children. At the moment, we are particularly concerned about that group because among the refugees in Thailand, we've seen a large increase in the numbers of urban refugees coming mostly here to Bangkok. Where there used to be perhaps 3,000 or 4,000 in Bangkok, we're now looking at more like 8,000 or 9,000. An increase in Syrians, in Palestinians from Syria, and Pakistani Christians. But there's another group of children that routinely pass through immigration detention in Thailand, and those children are much more numerous. Those are children of migrant workers or migrant worker children themselves. They tend to stay for less periods in the detention facilities. They tend to be detained for days or weeks rather than months or years. But they are still subject to the same appalling conditions that I described before. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, a UN body that governs the Convention on the Rights of the Child, recommends that all states expeditiously and completely cease the immigration and detention of children. The NCPO has shown some willingness to be a leader on children's rights, and this is an excellent test case on that front. The government has expressed willingness to adhere to international standards. If they really care about international children's rights standards, this is a great place to start. And what I think is so interesting about the situation in Thailand is there's some real opportunity for movement here. The Thai government has, in the last 2 years really, explored some alternatives to detention that show some promise. For instance, there is a limited use of a bail program here in Bangkok. And some refugees who are held in the immigration detention center can have access to a bail program that will allow them limited release. Unfortunately, the bail is incredibly expensive and difficult for refugees to find the cost. In addition, they need to have a guarantor from a non-governmental organization, and that can be difficult to arrange. And there are no written regulations or judicial oversight of that bail. So it's not entirely clear who gets bail when and whose bail might be revoked. And in fact, in June of this year, bail was revoked for 21 people, including a number of children, and they were taken back into the IDC at very limited notice. We think the bail program is really promising. We would like to see that developed. We would like to see it brought in line with international standards, for it to have written regulations and judicial oversight and a clear appeals process. The bail should be reasonable and regulated. The second interesting development in alternatives to detention, I think many of you might be aware of, which is the use of shelters for some Rohingya women and children who are passing through the south of Thailand. The Ministry for Social Development and Human Security already has shelters in place, and those can be used to shelter refugee families. That's a much better approach to dealing with child migrants than putting them in detention. We would recommend that families are kept together when they're put in those shelters, and that those shelters are open, and that people have access to UNHCR and other NGOs while they're in those shelters. A third example of an alternative to detention program can be seen in the Philippines, a good regional example, where refugees are released from detention pending their refugee status determination at their own recognizance. And they're required to check in periodically, and they're given a certain amount of support to live outside in the community. This actually is much cheaper for the Philippines government than detaining families, and has a surprisingly low rate of absconsion. I want to say a little bit more about the conditions in the IDCs. Our investigation covered IDCs in a number of different provinces, including Ranong, Chiang Mai, Mae Sot, and here in Bangkok. And we found consistently that the conditions are far below international standards. That the overcrowding is really severe, and that people don't have space to lie down and sleep, let alone mattresses or blankets. They're sleeping on tile or wooden floors. One woman detained with her children described being bitten on her cheek by a rat as she slept in the Chiang Mai IDC. One of the concerns consistently that I have with children in detention is that they're subject to the violence that goes on in detention. And there, I have a number of children who described witnessing violence between detainees, or being involved even with detainees who would slap or hit them because they got in their way. Children have very limited access to education while in detention. Here in Bangkok, there is a daycare center, again run by the international community, that offers children below the age of 12 some limited access to a very rudimentary curriculum, but it's not sufficient to meet the Thai government's obligations to educate all children at primary level. I've already mentioned the impact on mental health, but I also think the impact on nutrition and physical development of children is really important. That without access to regular food, without access to decent recreation space, children's growth is stunted. And among the family that I spoke to at the beginning, they described the girls described to me that after leaving the IDC, it was difficult to run. They would become winded. They would have cramps in their legs muscles were underdeveloped because of the years that they spent in the IDC. For me, immigration detention is no place for children. That's not just my opinion. That's the opinion of international law. And I think in Thailand, it's eminently possible to do something about it and get to alternatives to detention. And so that's, I think, what we really need to see happening. The Thai government can make a difference on this. This is an excellent test case to move towards better alternatives to detention. I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
I'm just a private member of the community that visits a detention centre. What is the official age of a child?
That's a great question. The age of children in immigration detention varies from newborns right up to 17-year-olds. There's actually a practice of taking pregnant women out of the immigration detention centre to a hospital so they can give birth, and bringing back in the newborn infants and the mothers when the babies are about 3 days old.
So we visit a 14-year-old who's separated from his family, his mother and siblings, but on the basis of he's too old. So, but you're saying up to 17 should be allowed in with the mother?
Absolutely, and under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, 18 is the age at which someone becomes an adult, and Thailand is a party to that convention.
Yeah. Thanks.
My name is Pravit Rochanaprak from the Nation newspaper. Were you surprised by the findings, and why do you think that the situations could have been allowed to go on for such a long period of time, I assumed, without having anyone making any noise about it to begin with? Thank you.
I was surprised by the findings because I was surprised by the severity of the situation here in Thailand. In other countries where I've worked, we've seen arbitrary detention, so that's a sense of detention without judicial review. But we rarely see this idea of indefinite detention of a child. And that, to me, is the biggest problem here in Thailand. The idea that you can lock up a 3-month-old child indefinitely, and he doesn't get out till he's 4 years old, and that's only because a third country decides to resettle him, that is not an acceptable system. So yes, I was surprised by the indefinite nature of detention here in Thailand. There are a number of NGOs here in Thailand that do excellent work on this issue. And one of the reasons I think that it's perhaps under the radar a little is that the Immigration Bureau has been very strict on how NGOs gain access to the detention facilities. Here in Bangkok, in June of this year, the superintendent of the Immigration Detention Center threw out one of the NGOs that had been doing some of the most vital work, helping refugees with legal status and helping detained people have access to health and education facilities. There's a sense that if you speak out, you will be punished. Human Rights Watch, we have the luxury that we make a lot of noise. And so we're glad to be able to do that. But I do think that the very limited access for NGOs and the difficulty that people have in getting to the immigration detention centers, both for the absolutely necessary monitoring of the facilities and in order to help the people detained inside, the fact that that access can be cut off is one of the things that suppresses people from speaking out.
Ron Corbin, Australian Associated Press. Okay, in a nutshell, you've sort of covered a lot, but in a nutshell, what's your message for the government at the moment? What do you want?
Our message to the government is they should absolutely stop detaining migrant children, and they should use alternatives to detention for migrant families. Those alternatives could be shelter or bail. While we are waiting for the Australian government, while we are waiting for the Thailand government to stop detaining
Canberra has plenty of problems out in Nauru, we know. I was going to ask you about that.
While we're waiting for the Thailand government to stop detaining children, we urgently recommend that they improve the conditions in the facilities.
Hi, Dana McLean. I'm freelance doing a piece for Iran. So since the military coup there's been a lot of crackdowns on visas and these kind of issues with migrants, have you seen an increase of children in detention centers?
So since the coup, we haven't actually seen huge changes in how the detention policy has been operating. The facilities are very, very full. One of our concerns right now is that it would be fairly easy to trigger a rash of arrests from the immigration and the police, and that then the facilities would become even more overcrowded. But at the moment, no, we haven't seen a huge shift in how the NCPO is operating. But I do think this is a really good opportunity for the NCPO to show their commitment to children's rights standards. They're running for a seat on the Human Rights Council. This is an excellent test case, a really great place to show progress.
Hello, Gaspar Ruiz from the Spanish News Agency. So right now, how many migrant children do you estimate are there in the IDC, and how many refugees children?
We have asked the government for official figures, and they haven't provided those to us, although we did have a profitable meeting with the government last Friday. We estimate that there are typically about 100 to 200 refugee children kept long-term in the IDCs every year, and that every year perhaps 4,000 to 5,000 migrant worker children pass through the IDCs.
Hello, my name is Mong Chonu. I'm from Myanmar. I'm a Rohingya. I belong to the Burmese Rohingya Association in Thailand, BRAT. Actually, I'm very concerned of the children detention here. I've been working for a long time, but I have been in touch with the detention center since 2009. I visited the south, Phuket and the Hadjai, and also the Phang Nga and some other detention center. Since 2013, I visited almost all the detention center and also children take care center. You are very much aware that we are under, the ethnic cleansing in my own country. Somebody said this is also genocide. We said that. So we have more than nearly 100,000 stateless or parentless children in my community, Rohingya. It means they are undocumented. How? Because they have the two-child policy in my country, officially for only Rohingya community. If they get more than two children, and they are not counted, listed at the family list. So they automatically become the stateless in my own country. So since 2013, due to the ethnic cleansing, many Buddhist people come into the Thailand. And then some the family members, some undocumented children also accompany with them. How? Why? Because undocumented children, they cannot get any educational, access in my own country. They can get any kind of facility because they are undocumented in their own country. So after arriving here, most of the children, they need some basics, they need, as you mentioned, especially healthcare, education, some sorts of freedom. When I visited the first time, I was very lucky. I visited the center, not detention center, not children take care center. This was arranged by the Chularata Mantri, the Muslim leader of Thailand. Arrangement on his request, the government, they also have the one center. And I went there, I was very happy because they, used to play football and they have the times and they were very happy. But within 1 month, due to the immigration request, they stop and close the, the camp. Even the camp in charge asked me to arrange some, the toilet, the washroom and toilet for them. I'm trying to do that to request some my Muslim friend in Thailand, Thai Muslim friend. However, unfortunately closed. So what I saw there about the education, I visited one area, Satun, and I also brought some, food, the beef, because we don't have money, but the one Turkish, NGO donated some cows, $15,000 of cows, then we just slaughtered there, and also we keep it with the Muslim group there. And when I visited first time, that is okay. Second time, third time, what I saw about the education, the children are very strange, because there is one channel, TV channel known as White Channel. This is the Muslim TV, the Muslim, Thai Muslim running there. I met one guy who take care of the education. I'm very pleased with them. I'm not going to blame them. So they give education, mostly Islamic education, religious. We are the Muslim, we need that. And they start teaching them Yahweh language. Even I've been here more than 20 years. I don't know how to speak Yahweh. And they start teaching them, there's some South Thailand languages. And, the curriculum is very strange, what I mean. And then how they change within 1 month. They have the cap. I'm a Muslim, I love the cap, I love praying. But the Rohingya community are a bit, the moderate. We don't use this kind of things. If you visit the Arkan, you can see all people not put the cap. All the girls have no scrap. They become completely changing, like religiously, but this is, I think, something enforced. So this is my question to you is that, when they arrived here, they are, they flee in the persecution, religious, from Burma. Please arrange for them. How can you arrange, by requesting the Thai government to look after these innocent children by themselves? By themselves means, refugee means, this is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, they have the full power to look after them, the full duty, as well as we have the IOM, we have some other, the many, the NGOs. So, can you arrange or request to the Thai government to look after these people, especially the minor children, by a special group, not by religious group, not by other group, because the Thai authority immigration, they threw these people to the Muslim, the community. But this is good. They provide food and many things. I thank to them. But, my feeling is, I don't like to see my people to become radicalized or something, as well as, for example, Indonesia. I had some sorts of, the news from there. So, this is also the same question I am asking to you. I also recommend or I support your speech that refugees should be, and also especially the children and the women should be looked after, and they sent to the, arrange some, the children house or the, the refugee take care house. And can you arrange for this? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. I think it's I think it's very important to urge the Thai government to see Rohingya as a humanitarian problem and not a security issue. And I think that the way you expressed that question was exactly right. Refugees have fled difficult situations. They should be, when refugee children and families arrive here, they should be treated as a humanitarian, as in need of humanitarian care and not as a security threat. And so that would do exactly the kind of things that you raised. Children should be, with their families, put in shelters. There is an entity within the Thai government, the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security, that has the capacity to provide shelter to the Rohingya and to other groups of refugees. And I think that's exactly the right thing that should be done. Obviously, some of the smuggling and trafficking issues we've been seeing haven't been substantively dealt with by the Thai government, and that's a serious problem. And that refugee children are ending up in detention. And the reality is that that's absolutely not the right place for them. And the reality is that honestly, if we put them in open centers, they would receive the care they need, and many might not even stay here in Thailand. So there really is no reason to detain him.
Another question, 1 minute only, about the trafficking. The trafficking is now going, but this is undocumented. Most of the children are not at the hands of the traffickers. Sometimes they, manage to escape, or sometimes, somebody, their relatives or the Rohingyas arrange to release them. There are some children, So could you please try to, how to, they handle these children, and by the help of Thai government and some NGOs, and after release from there, after flight from there, could you please arrange for them some education? Another thing is, in Thailand, we are one thing very pleased. Thai immigration or Thai police or Thai people, they love the children. Even when they were in the detention center, they love them. But due to the access, they don't have the good access or good, the place. That's why, they have the problem. They got the problem. Thank you very much.
No, and thank you for that. And at Human Rights Watch, we issued some statements detailing how the Thai government has failed to respond adequately to the smuggling and trafficking problems we've seen in the south. And we've also put out some substantive reporting, which I can provide you with links to after the presentation, on detailed problems of police and immigration officials shaking down migrant workers and other immigrant groups in Thailand for bribes. And we're absolutely happy to provide some of that information after the conference. Thank you for those questions.
Yes, my name is Ponpen Kongkajon from the Cross Cultural Foundation. I wish to share some of the experience dealing with the cases of bailing out the refugees. I think there is also some problematics in that system. First, it's requiring amount of money of each of the refugees. So when we are talking about bailing out children, does that mean the children is dependent on the parents and can leave, or is for the policy discussion, no? And when we are talking about bail money, it's, if I'm not wrong, it's about 50,000 baht each, and it has to be arranged. First, it was arranged by the National Human Rights Commission under the ICCPR subcommittee, which I'm the member of. But later on, the police of immigration has made that standard into their individual discretion. Whoever access to this channel will be able to get bail out. So transparency and also the monitoring, as you know, the monitoring system, it has been limited and also even none in some of the bail systems. Yep. So if we're going to propose for that as a second alternatives of release the children, we should have a proper discussion about how to. And this system shall also not discriminate to those groups who have no access to bail money, which organization going to support them. And it is a loophole where the Thai government is using, as they are not doing anything wrong. Why do we need the bail money? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those questions, and I very much agree with some of the sentiments that you've raised. At Human Rights Watch, we were proposed that any bail system for release from detention is reasonable and clearly regulated. That the amount of money is within the capacity of people to pay, and that the regulations are clearly written down, that there's judicial oversight and the possibility for appeal. In the particular cases of immigration detention, particularly when you look at refugees detained, in many circumstances it is preferable for people to be released on their own recognizance and without a bail requirement. Given that the Thai government has already started working with a bail program, we want to see that bail program improved and in keeping with international regulations. So reasonable and well regulated.
My name's Trent Herdman. I'm a doctor from the UK. How's the provision of healthcare and kind of consideration of hygiene in the detention centres?
Thanks for that question. The sanitation and healthcare is severely lacking in many facilities. Here in Bangkok, the medical care is often provided by NGOs, and their access, as I described before, is sometimes limited, and that also limits the amount of healthcare provision. There are routinely fewer toilets and fewer access to sanitation facilities than recommended by UN minimum standards. The cells, I've heard repeated descriptions of them being infected by rats, by cockroaches, by mice, by other bugs. We repeatedly see children who've spent long time in immigration detention centers emerging malnourished, underdeveloped in terms of their physical growth. And then we have lingering concerns about the impact of immigration detention on anyone's mental health, but also particularly on children's mental health, as they seem to feel as the concept of indefinite detention seems to take a greater toll on children than on adults. We would recommend strongly that the Thai government permit decent access for the international community and for NGOs into the facilities, not just here in Bangkok, but in other IDCs, so that at least we can start moving towards emergency provision of decent health care. But we're quite far away from those standards right now.
Hi, Alice. My name's Chris Eaves. I'm the Director of Legal Services for the Jesuit Refugee Service based here in Thailand. I agree with much of what you've said. A couple of points. We've noticed a big increase in the numbers of people, of detainees who've been arrested and detained since NCPO took over. The cells in the IDC at Suan Plu now contain 160 to about 180 persons. Ordinarily, we'd be looking at half that number in those cells. Also, I noted from the report that you were sent a letter by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stating that JRS provides bail to detainees. I'd just like to make absolutely clear that we were ejected from providing services in the Immigration Detention Centre when we attempted to discipline a staff member. And since that point in time, every person who we had bailed was forced to return to the Immigration Detention Centre, and among that group there were 3 children, 2 under the age of 10 and 1 teenage boy, unaccompanied, who had to go back into the Immigration Detention Centre. But I'd also just like to finish on thanking Human Rights Watch for this great piece of work. Thank you.
Chris, don't go away. I'm very grateful to Chris for pointing out that at the back of the report, we sent a summary of the findings in the report to the Thai government, and about a month ago, a little less than a month ago, they replied, and we printed their reply as an annex in the back of the report. So if you want to see the Thai government perspective, there are some interesting points here, most of which we don't agree with. if any of you have questions about NGOs operating in the service in the Bangkok Center, Chris has a lot more expertise on this than I do, and I don't know if you would be willing to take some questions now, Chris.
I'd be more than happy to, yep. If I could also point out that letter from MFA was dated, I believe, the 14th of August.
That's right, yeah.
Which is 1 month and 7 days after every single person we had bailed out was forced to return to the Immigration Detention Center because the Immigration Detention Center was apparently upset with the Jesuit Refugee Service for trying to discipline its own staff members. And so that was 21 people. 25 were recalled, but with the help of UNHCR and the US Embassy, we managed to get some resettled. But also, just on the bail requirements, these have become ever more restrictive. So now, to get bail, what you must do is pay $50,000, have a Thai national guarantor. JRS cannot, or any other organization cannot operate as a guarantor. It has to be an individual. And now you have to have a date for resettlement already given by a resettlement country, which means that you're a matter of weeks away from being taken to a safe third country, which means that bail in its operation is practically useless now. It's been made so useless as to give only a few weeks of liberty before resettlement, whereas a year ago, 14 months ago, 18 months ago, it was a really useful thing, in particular for getting very vulnerable people, children and families, out of detention. But that really, although there are odd instances of bail now, it's pretty much gone as a useful tool. All I can say is just repeat what I said. We attempted to discipline a staff member who we had concerns about, and that involved a period where the staff member would have to be outside the IDC for retraining. We were given a condition, either the staff member stays or you go. And we had to do what we thought was right in terms of disciplining and training our own staff. And unfortunately, as a result, we were kicked out. She is still working at IDC for another organization. Yeah, and yes, and that's very problematic. There are indeed, yep. There is COER, the Catholic Organization for Emergency Relief and Refugees, IOM, who provide the daycare center and some counseling services, and the Jesuit Foundation Prison Ministry, who provide some additional food and healthcare.
I think one of the main concerns, one of the larger themes that Chris is reflecting here, is the concept of discretion. That the immigration detention system in Thailand is not well regulated, and that superintendents of facilities have enormous discretion about how people are treated. That's not a fair situation to leave children in. And it leaves vulnerable children and refugees open to continuing abuses of their rights. I think now would be a good moment to sum up, unless there are any other questions.
Just a quick one. Paul Greening with no one at all at the moment. I just want to ask about the UN and its role at the moment, the resident coordinator, IOM, UNHCR. In your opinion, or anyone else's, they're working obviously on the issue. Is there anything else they should be doing, they're not doing? Are they giving the support to the NGOs and often the cover, the political cover for the NGOs and support that they should be, or is there more that they should be doing?
The UN should be doing two particular things here in Thailand. We have more than two things listed as specific recommendations in the back of the report, but I'll point to two particular things. One is that all UN agencies who are part of the UN country team can be working together to end arbitrary detention. It's a clear and core violation of human rights, and it's something that UNICEF, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNHCR, IOM, all of these agencies are working together on the issue of arbitrary detention, and this is a great moment to push it forward as it applies to children. So we would really urge them to take up the issue of immigration detention of children under the auspices of their continuing work on arbitrary detention, and to continue to push that issue forward. The second issue is a little bit more specific. UNHCR is the agency in Thailand that is responsible for processing refugee claims because the Thai government has not ratified the 1951 Refugee Convention. The Thai government maintained in a meeting with us last week and has consistently maintained that even though they haven't signed the Refugee Convention, they adhere to its principles. We can see even from this report that that's not true. But in many other ways, the Thai government does not live up to the standards in the Refugee Convention. One of the ways it doesn't do that is it doesn't hear any refugee cases, and it doesn't make it possible for people to claim asylum in Thailand. So that responsibility falls to UNHCR. And right now, because there's been an increase in the number of people among the urban refugee population seeking asylum in Thailand, the waiting time for an initial interview has really shot up. So whereas you might in previous years have had an initial interview within a few months of approaching UNHCR, you're now waiting 2 or 3 years for an initial ticket. And so that makes those people very vulnerable to detention, very vulnerable to arrest on the streets of Bangkok, and once detained, gives them real problems getting out of detention. So we would urge UNHCR to do all it can to get that process moving faster, while recognizing that UNHCR has its own budget constraints and its own problems.
Hi, my name's Aarti Kapoor. I'm independent at the moment as well. My question is about the officers and staff at the immigration detention centres. I noticed in your report that you said that you had met 8 government officials, but I don't know at what level. So the question is, because we've heard about the detainees, we've heard about the regulations and the laws and whatnot, but how about the people that are at the front line working in these centres with these with the children and the families? What are they like, and how do they do their work, and did you meet and talk with any of them? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. In the course of researching this report and also a previous human rights report on refugees in Thailand, which is called Ad Hoc and Inadequate, I can provide you the links. We spoke with a number of working level officials at the IDC level. So I've spoken with commanders of an IDC, officers on duty at police lockups when they've been bringing in migrant populations. That's the level. In the course of researching this report, we directly approached high-level Thai government officials and asked for interviews, and were not given that opportunity. After completing the report and sending the findings to them, we then received the letter back that we have here, and then had a meeting last week with members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry for Social Development and Human Security, and the National Security Council. But to return to your particular question about what do the individual officers do, I think this is like you will find in many places. Individual officers run the gamut. Some are humanitarians, and some are security officers with too much power in their hands. At the working level, I think immigration officers are acting without clear directives. And so if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Immigration Bureau they're in a position right now to issue clear regulations on how to treat children in detention. They're in a position to issue clear regulations on how to provide children and families access to shelters or access to other programs that would get them out of detention. And they're not doing that. And so too much discretion stays within the hands of the superintendents. And so sometimes you'll see superintendents who are operating decently, who are humanitarians, and sometimes you'll see superintendents who are abusing the power that's been given to them. And I think that's exactly the vulnerability that we really have problems with.
Hello, I'm Magali Lapouge, intern at the EU. You proposed alternatives to detention, which is a very good thing. But in this paper, you say that, according to the Thai government, detention of some small number of migrant children in Thailand is not a result of the government's policies, but rather the preference of their migrant parents themselves. So my question is, how do we deal with this image of responsibility? Because according to the government, it's the responsibility of the parents, of the migrants. So how do we change that? Because there is a note full of senses to me in there. And is there just international and humanitarian law to help us in this matter?
Thanks very much for that question. You highlighted a part of the Thai government's response to us, which said that it's families' choices for children to remain in detention. If the Thai government didn't have a detention regime, that would not be a choice that the family would need to make. So that is, as a first principle, is a very short-sighted response on behalf of the government. We would promote the concept of family unity, that we always want families to remain together. We're not proposing that families be split up. And we're saying let's use shelters, let's use release programs, let's use recognizance and bail in limited circumstances to make sure that families stay together and that children have decent opportunities. Fortunately, there is good international law on this standard. The Convention on the Rights of the Child has been interpreted by the Committee on the Rights of the Child to say that states must expeditiously and completely cease detention of children for reasons of their immigration status. It is not legitimate to detain a child because of their immigration status. So we know that that's clear. Now it's a question of getting to a point of implementing that. And so you hear these kinds of responses from the Thai government. That's short-sighted. There are ways to not detain. There are alternatives to detention that exists, and there are agencies in Thailand with the capacity to help the Thai government develop good practices on these standards. So there is no reason to still be doing this. The alternatives also, they're cheaper than locking people up. There's no reason, all around it's bad policy and out of step with international law. But I do think that the concept that it's a family's choice is really the families faced with a rock and a hard place. If the father is in detention and the children are in shelters that are inadequately run and have problems with smuggling and trafficking, yes, the father may want to recall the child to detention. But that's a horrible place to put the family in, and that isn't what the Thai government should be doing.
Hi, I'm Vivian from the UN Refugee Agency. A number of issues are raised, and I just wanted to clarify or to present some of the challenges as well. On the issue of just generally alternatives to detention, this is something that UNHCR constantly advocates with the government. I mean, I think in every single meeting we have with the authorities, this comes up, and we're constantly seeking alternatives to detention. For example, for the Rohingya in the south, since the beginning of last year, when a large number of Rohingya arrived, I think over 2,000 or so, we have been working to try with the government to try and identify sites to set up alternatives to detention, places where families could be together, places where people could have greater freedom of movement. This has been really challenging, not to make excuses for the government or anything, but a number of sites were proposed, but due to local opposition, it couldn't go ahead. And this is something we're still working on. We're hopeful that a site can be identified and developed soon. But along with that comes other challenges. For example, it is good to see that, again, for example, for the Rohingya population in the south, children and women are allowed to stay in shelters, not in detention per se. But with that comes challenges such as, they have freedom of movement, but it also means that smugglers have easy access to them. And so we're seeing cases where, you know, people are escaping or they're falling into the hands of smugglers, and they go into these smugglers' camps in the jungle. So along with the freedom of movement, there needs to be, you know, some caution there to prevent exploitation of these women and children. On the issue of education for the Rohingya children in the south, what we're trying to do at the moment is to give them, to incorporate them into the local education system. Thailand has an education for all policy, so we're hoping to work with that. But language is a problem, so we're working to give intensive Thai lessons to some of these Rohingya children so that they can be somehow streamed into the local education system. And hopefully that will address some of the concerns that you, sir, have. And lastly, just to note, on processing times and the appeal for UNHCR to process people faster, it is, as you mentioned, a big, there is a lot of pressure because of the large numbers that have arrived in the last 2 years or so. So UNHCR is constantly trying to find the balance between trying to process people more quickly, but also preserving the integrity of the asylum process. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions, Vivian. We are very encouraged by the global detention strategy that UNHCR put in place in its annual meetings back in Geneva in July. I'm very encouraged to see that Thailand is one of the focus countries worldwide for UNHCR's approach to challenging detention of refugees. So that seems like a really positive movement, and we're very, very encouraged to see that. It seems to me that this is a very good opportunity to start pushing again on the issue of children in immigration detention, and I know this is something that has concerned UNHCR in Thailand for quite some time. Also, with the upcoming Human Rights Council elections and the concept that Thailand is a candidate for a position on the HRC, that seems like an excellent time perhaps to raise this issue again, and that this might be a point of leverage for an excellent test case that could really show Thailand's willingness to move forward on international standards. Maybe child detention is one of those issues we could get a little bit of movement on so that they could show their commitment to children's rights in the upcoming movements. So thank you so much.
Hi, sorry. I'd just like to say that you don't have to be part of an NGO to visit people in the detention centres. So we're just a small group of women that visit on Monday mornings, but I think there's people that visit most mornings, and we meet in a little cafe across the road. All you need is a number of someone in the detention centre and your passport and a copy of your passport and your visa, and you can visit someone. And what that does, it allows that person who's in detention to come out of that infested, overswollen room for 2 hours. Otherwise, they don't get out except for once every 3 days. We visit a family. The 14-year-old son is in the men's room by himself, and the mother and 2 siblings are in the women's room. So we visit to get them together. Otherwise, they wouldn't be united. So while the situation is awful, it's not going to be fixed in the near future, but that's just something that you can do to make their life a little bit more bearable and show that somebody cares about them.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think it's really good to point to incredible people who are doing that kind of thing. The underlying issue is that families in the immigration detention center in Bangkok and in other facilities around Thailand are separated. So the family that I mentioned at the beginning, the family of Sri Lankan Tamil refugees, the girls were off in one cell and their father was in another. And within the IDC in Bangkok, there's no opportunity for them to come together. It's only through volunteer groups like this, which do the wonderful service of having people visit at the same time, that allows families to see each other. And that's just, I mean, it's heartbreaking to watch a child who hasn't seen a parent, even though they're detained in the same facility. Great. I think we'll call it to a close there. So thank you all so much for listening and for your interest in this issue. I'm happy to stay around and answer questions individually afterwards.
Wheeling and dealing and finding solutions to their differences.